Good afternoon. Happy New Year to you, and welcome to our January 4th, 2023 Rotary Club of Columbus meeting. Call the meeting to order. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this point, I'd like to call on Joseph if you would come and give us invocation according to his faith tradition. Joseph, if you would come.
Thank you, President Cedric. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for gathering us here safely today. We thank you for the rain we received overnight. Today, we thank you for the new year, for new opportunities, and for new chances to learn from each other and our diverse backgrounds. We thank you for this club, the friendships formed here, and the opportunity to serve our community. Father, as we enter 2023, please help us to focus on putting service above self and to always be mindful of those in need. Thank you for the meal before us, the hands that prepared it, and your new mercies given to us each day. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen. Don't forget the cans on your table or Venmo on the screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. At this point, we'd like to call on Frey to introduce our visitors and guests today.
Thank you, President Cedric and fellow Rotarians. We have several guests today. Sophia Mims is with us. Sophia is the granddaughter of Ian and Julie Bond, and school has not started at Midland Academy, so they wanted to have her with them today and to share this experience. So welcome, Sophia. Courtney Huffman has Jessica French here today. Jessica is the executive director of the Columbus Youth Symphony Orchestra. So thank you, welcome, and thanks for all you do with our children and teaching them a little bit about discipline and music. So Jack Rosenhammer has Michael Woodham here. Welcome, Michael. Michael and Jack are business partners with Vintageville and also operate a mobile bar. They may have been busy over the weekend. So Reggie Thompson has Wendy Lewis here. Wendy works in the municipal clerk's office. So thank you. Welcome, Wendy, and thanks for what you do to keep things moving smoothly over at the Government Center. And Tom Waynick has Rick Matson. Rick is a coach at the Pastoral Institute, and you may remember that his daughter was here back in August, so he's following his daughter Holly to a Rotary meeting. Holly was here. She was actually had helped us. She was an intern in my office last summer and helped us with our slide deck when we did our Ron and I did our presentation in August. So welcome, Rick. And oh, by the way, Holly, update, she is a swimmer and she's already qualified for states. So congrats to her. Pass that along. And that's all we have today, Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Yes, let's give our visitors and guests a hand. We thank you all so much for joining us, and especially when we have a young person that would actually have a day out of school and choose to join us for lunch. So let's particularly give her a hand for being with us today. It's always great when you start the year off with a new member, and at this point, I'd like to call on David, if you would, and congratulate David as he comes forward on his new role. He's going to introduce us to our newest member.
Good afternoon. I have the pleasure of introducing you to Lieutenant Mike Daly. Mike is obviously lieutenant with the Muskogee County Sheriff's Office. I've known Mike since college and ROTC days, and I won't tell all the stories. So actually, I'm more afraid of what he would say. But Mike went to Kendrick and Spencer. He grew up on Fort Benning as an Army brat with 2 sisters and a brother. He graduated from Mercer University. An amazing guy, studied Russian, fluent in Russian. He studied all kinds of things, martial arts. He is kind of a man of all trades, so to speak. He served in the Army Medical Service Corps in Korea and Fort Bragg. He's been with the Sheriff's Office for 30 years. He served as an ID tech and instructor and he is currently the court services supervisor, which basically means he manages all the judges and all the courtrooms and takes care of them and their security. And I have to say, during the pandemic, Mike got hit and probably had one of the biggest jobs of anybody, and now we have court all over the place, and he has been coordinating all of that and has done an amazing job with it. And probably most importantly, well, he graduated with a master's master's degree in public safety administration from Columbus State University. And probably most importantly, he's married to Sadna, a fellow Rotarian. And like me, he married up. But anyway, I hope you all welcome Mike. He's a great guy, and I think he will make a great Rotarian and serve with us. Mike?
Thank you, Judge Vanieri, very much. I look forward very much to working with all of you and meeting you and becoming friends with you. Look very forward to working with Sheriff Countryman, my boss, as well. And I'm ready to go to get started doing things. So once again, thank you so much.
Mike, we just like to welcome you as being an official member of our Rotary Club and look forward to getting to know you and working with you as we go forward. Let's give him a hand for joining us today. Thank you. Just a few announcements. If you have not received your monthly directory, please connect with the office, Julia Sue, at the back table. I think the physical ones are still here, and if we could get you to pick those up. And if you have not seen the great photograph of your club president in action in the January edition of the Rotary International magazine, please check social media article and the photograph submitted by past president Ryan Clemens. We thank him so much for that. Without further information or announcements at this point, I'd like to call on past President Joe Young, and Joe will come and introduce today's program for us. Joe, if you would come.
Well, hello, everyone. Happy New Year, and go Dogs. It's my honor and pleasure to be able to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Gail Burgos. I first met Gail 3 years ago in January of 2020 as I was preparing to become president of this club. Gail and I became fast friends, and I thought even then, I was like, you know what, it would be really great to have her come speak to our group at some point in the future. And so today is the day. We're fortunate to have her lead a presentation. In the Christian faith tradition, Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. On this, all the laws and the prophets hang on these two commandments. I think the most important characteristic I can tell you about Gail is she loves God and she loves other people. And I think that's something that all of us should aspire to. Gail grew up in Talbot County, not too far from here. Education was instilled in her, the importance of education was instilled in her at a very early age. Her father was actually the first black superintendent of schools in the state of Georgia. And she's carried that love of education, love of mentorship throughout her career, professional and personal pursuits. She honors her father's legacy each year by providing scholarships to deserving high school graduates from Talbot County High School. And I think that's just such a neat way to honor her father's legacy and continue to help young people growing up. She met her husband Pedro as a high school student. They're coming up on 35 years of marriage. She and Pedro are blessed with 3 daughters, a 2-year-old grandson and 1-year-old grand-twin, she calls them. So three grandchildren, blessings for them. She's currently pursuing her passion for education and mentorship through her role as executive director of Girls Inc. Prior to moving into that role, she spent 25 years with Total Systems, serving many capacities. Among other things, she was director of their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Her career has taken her all over the world, interacting with people of different backgrounds and ethnicities, teaching them how to better interact with each other, and certainly something that we'll benefit from today. She's a highly sought-out speaker for her background and knowledge in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, having led seminars here locally and around the country. We're quite fortunate to have her here in our club as a fellow Rotarian, and I hope that you'll help me welcome to the stage our fellow Rotarian and my good friend, Gail Burgos.
Thank you, Joe. I'm very humbled and honored. It's always very humbling to hear your biography shared in such a manner. It's a little embarrassing sometimes, but I think I got all the main points, especially my love for my father and my family, and of course my love for God. So thank you so much. And thank you, President Cedric, for this opportunity. I know when he came and asked me several months ago to speak, and as you heard from Joe, that part of our conversation when we first encountered each other, he said, "You need to come and speak at Rotary," and I wasn't even a member yet, and then so it's just miraculous how God works, and so I am here today, not to just represent Girls Inc., but definitely from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. So it has come fruition, and again, thank you for the opportunity. Don't know, and I'm not here to judge today, your own bias or to rehash what diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about, because I would imagine that many of you, in some form or fashion, have heard about it. It's been around for over 30 years. It's not something that is new, but it has taken a new awareness here in the last several years, especially here in 2020, when the country was yet in another racial uprise. And so those of us who have worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we were ambassadors and champions for our organization, was tapped on quite heavily to come and address that tension. But it has been around for quite some time. So I won't spend a great deal of time today talking about the definitions of DEI, and now they have even moved it to JEDI. But I do want to talk about specifically from unconscious bias to conscious inclusion, and what that really means. And those are my two objectives. Just briefly, here's as a picture of the affiliation of organizations that are near and dear to my heart. As you can see, and Joe did not mention, I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and had pledged at Columbus State University in '93. Again, here are the objectives that I want to share with you today. And again, it's very simple. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to analyze what your biases are, but I just want to plant a nugget or two for you to think about yourself and analyze and say, how do I, each and every single day, move from my own biases and create an environment of inclusivity? That's what it's really all about. Diversity. Diversity is simply a fact. I know you may have heard various definitions, but in layman's term, it is a fact. It is representation. And there's many forms of diversity, and you'll see just here in another slide what those are. But equity is a choice, and oftentimes it is interchanged with equality. And I'd like to just share a quick little nugget what the difference between the two are. I feel a little intimidated, I will say, being in a room full of lawyers and judges about equity and equality, but in the vein of diversity, equity, and inclusion, equity is, or equality is what I would say, everyone gets the same shoe, okay? Everyone has that same shoe, but equity is making sure that the shoe fits everyone. So it's just a little term that I like to use when I'm sharing with audiences so they understand the terminology, not going too deep. Inclusion, however, is the action. It is what makes diversity and people with their unique practices welcome. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. And then belonging. How do you create a sense of belonging in a true welcoming aspect? So it goes beyond just DEI. Is what are you really doing to ensure that people, in their own unique manner, regardless of their demographic or diverse aspects, truly feel welcome in the environment that you're creating and that you're a part of. So here it is. There are over 50 dimensions and aspects of diversity. Well, if you see right there in the center, personality, okay, that's our core. But when you look at the outers and what makes up your personality, there's internal. And these are the ones that people readily most see. Your organizations, your age, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, right? And when people run their diversity data, this is normally where they run it from. But as you can see, there's another circle there. It's external. And those are the aspects, as you heard Joe just share a few minutes ago, you wouldn't have known those things until he shared it about me. My marital status, my education, right? He didn't share my hobby. I actually love to play tennis. I've been playing tennis now for almost 20 years out of Corda. Near and dear to my heart as well. And so those make up the external dimensions. And then there's that third level, organizational diversity aspects. And as you can see, that's seniority, that's work location, and so forth. But all of those things create what we call a favorable bias or an unfavorable bias. And if you think about it for a moment, in your own right, you know, how you grew up, where you grew up, who you were exposed to, your experiences, right? I'm looking out over the room, and I see a majority older white males. Well, that's just one aspect. And again, I'm making an assumption. But each of you are exactly very, very different. When you put that other layer there, your work background, your marital status, your location, all of that plays a huge part in the various dimensions of who you are as a person. And that's how you have to think about it and see through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, how does all that play a part into unconscious bias? Well, as you just saw, with all those various levels and layers of diversity, they do. That's information that is coming into our wheelhouse from the day we were born. Our body is a temple, and I will say, in the vein of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as you heard from Joe, I am a woman of faith, so when I do speak, I always make that declaration so that I'm not offensive to anyone. But the body is a temple. And our body actually then uses our five senses to bring information, to process information in from the day that we were born. So it's constantly coming in every aspect, from what you touch, from what you hear, from what you say, from what you taste. And so all of that plays a part into our personality. But you don't really get to know anyone, truly, who they are, until you sit back and you ask them and you spend time with them. And as leaders, particularly servant leaders, isn't that what we're championed to do? We have to get to know people. We can't make an assumption based off of a bio, and thank you again for reading my bio, but Joe actually took the time to get to know me, not just from a piece of paper or something that he Googled. We actually sat down and had several conversations, did we not? Yeah. So that's how it is, getting to know people. It's like the tip of an iceberg. You have to get to know what's below the surface, and you have to spend time with them, no matter how higher up in the organization that you may be. So to be biased is to be human. And I know this sounds cliche, but it is truly. We all are born with a bias, every single one of us, including myself. You, me, my children, Joe, President Cedric, we all have a bias. The key to it is what do we do about it? And that's where I really want to spend a little bit more time talking about today. What do you do once you are aware of your bias? And again, we all have it. So how do you move from an unconscious bias to a conscious inclusivity? And it happens more so when you're not thinking about it, because the body is on autopilot. The mind is actually very lazy, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't like to process new information very much. It likes to rely on what it already knows. It likes to rely on the past experiences. Everything that it has gathered, everything that has come into its wheelhouse, the mind likes to instinctively, you've heard the word instinct, well, that's what it likes to do. It doesn't want to get to know something new. But that unconscious bias tends to seep up when we're in a rush, when we're busy, when we're hurrying. And I once was at a seminar, and one of the speakers there, another DEI champion, he shared a brief scenario that I'll share with you. He said, I was in this rush to make it to a client, And one of my colleagues, she was coming along with me, and he said, mind you, I grew up in the South. My father, he was very rigid. He didn't care for, for women being working. My mother was an at-home worker, and he said, you need to stay at home, and you need to take care of the family. That was his mindset. So he had heard some of these old-fashioned type of analogies growing up, and he said he never thought anything about it. He wanted to distance himself from that. He actually moved when he went off to college, moved up north, moved out west, went to California, traveled around the world, had all these other different experiences. He said, but in that day, he was rushed. He was trying to make it in the Atlanta traffic, and there was an accident. And when he finally made it up to the accident and passed by, he looked over and he whispered something, or he said something out that only his colleague heard, and he pulled up to the door and he jumped out. And when he did, his colleague tapped him on the shoulder and she said, did you realize what you just said? He said, no, what did I say? He said, you made a statement that you should have known. Women can't drive. And it's like, wow. That caught him off guard because here he was, this DEI expert, right, going in to talk to a new board of executives about their own unconscious bias, and his own unconscious bias just seeped up and seeped out. And that's what we mean by it. It actually shows up and shows out when you're least expected. So you just have to be aware of that. All right. My question then becomes, how diverse is your own network? When you think about your circle and who you're engaging with, your family, your friends, your colleagues, it is all important that you're being intentional about diversifying your circle, and your trusted circle at that, whether it's at home, whether it's in your community, or whether it's at work. Here's another example. I once was called, and you heard Joe say, I was a representative, of course, for TSIS over 25 years. And as their DEI champion, I traveled to many of the locations that they had all over the world. But I did get this one call from a senior vice president in New York. And he said, Gail, I need you to come up and talk to me about how can I make the women, and there's not a lot of women here in my office, more inclusive. He said there's over 500 people in our office, and only about 10 to 15% are women. So I'm struggling with that. And I said, sure, I'll come up. So I went and I said, I want to make sure that the sessions, I don't want to speak to a big crowd, but if this is going to be meaningful and it's going to be two-way dialogue, let's make the groups very small. So he kind of sorted up through the day, and they came in groups about 50, 50, 50, and of course I was there all day. But Mike happened to join one of those sessions, and he posed a question after I went through the spiel, and he said, so how do I get to know or really help these women that are in this organization? And I said, quite simple. I said, have you got to know them? You know, yes, she's a woman, but have you gotten to know Sally? Have you gotten to know Sue? Have you gotten to know Jane personally? Do you know what her likes and her dislikes are? Do you know about her family? Do you know how many children she has? What's her marital status? What are her aspirations? What are her gifts? What is she bringing to the organization besides, oh, she's a talented programmer? Yes, you're a senior vice president, but it's incumbent upon you, even at your level, to get to know who they are. And then you champion and charge your leadership that is over them to do the same thing. Again, it goes back to the basis of getting to know people and taking the time to do it. So again, we're working to real inclusivity. Here are just a few tips, ladies and gentlemen, of how to do so. I won't read all of them, but the main one that you should pay a little close attention to is keeping an open mind to others. I'll share with you yet another experience that I had happened to have experienced here a while ago when doing another workshop and keeping an open mind. Right along the time that there was, again, this racial tension, and another client had asked me to come in and address her staff who was having some issues, unfortunately it was black and white issues, in her organization. And I said, sure, and I made it a 2-day session, broke it up into 4 hours each. And on that first day, I gave them an assessment. I said, here, I'm not looking over your shoulder. I'm not assessing your own bias. It's for you to do that. And then on the next day, we're going to come back and we're going to explore and talk about, in an open dialogue, in a safe space, just what those biases are, if you so choose to. Well, one of the ladies, a black woman, had the courage to actually stand up and share that she had animosity, strong animosity, against the police department, against police officers when she saw them. Because her son, before she moved to Georgia, had been brutally beaten by a police officer. He was found guilty, but she relocated to Georgia to try to move that behind her and start afresh. But of course, with the George Floyd racial tension that had occurred and him suffering murder at the hands of, unfortunately, a police officer, all of that came back up to her. And it, unfortunately, I said in bias, it's just like an invincible backpack, ladies and gentlemen. You don't pull it off when you walk through a door, okay, in an organization. You actually carry that. So she brought that into the workplace, all of that animosity and that buildup right along with her, rightfully so. But it was causing problems in the workplace. And I said, so let's talk about that. And my job was not to suppress her feelings or her sentiments. That was not what I was there for. I was there only to simply help her identify what those biases were and to create an opportunity for her to explore that and to self-evaluate herself each time that came up. So the next day, what I did in that session, I invited 5 guests. And unbeknownst to the group, they didn't know who they were. They just thought they were fellow colleagues. And I made sure that they had diverse aspects, that they were different genders, different nationalities, and so forth. What I did ask them to do, if you go back to the 4 types of dimensions and layers, was that I asked that they do not disclose their occupation intentionally. But I put them strategically at the tables with all of the employees, and they talked about themselves. They got to know each other. It was a getting to know exercise. And when they came back, I said, now share at their table about each one of the guests that was here today. And ironically, they talked about, oh my goodness, he's a veteran. He's a father. She's a mother. You know, and it just went on and on about what good people they were. It was not until the very end that I revealed to the entire group that these were all, in fact, police officers. The woman who had such emotion and tension about what she thought a police officer was, and of course, the experience that she had, she began to cry. And she said, I would never judge this gentleman, one of the officers, his name was Jeff, I would never judge Jeff in that manner. And I said, well, that's kind of my point, Brenda. I want you to start looking at, whenever you see a police officer now, that you don't immediately go to what happened to your son, that you start to think about these individuals that you met here today, and you get to know them. That's really what it's all about. I left that session, and I said, I'll follow back up here in 3 months and see how you all are doing. But when I touched base with the CEO of that organization, she said, thank you. That actually has helped quite a bit, sharing those tips that you shared of how to stop, how to pause, and how to be aware of your own biases that you have, and get to know people and avoid making assumptions. So that's kind of my point. There are a couple things that I want to share as stereotypes and biases, and some of these may be very uncomfortable to hear, but it does go back to stereotypes and the bias that we often do. Young people just don't have a clue. Old folks need to stay off the road. They cannot drive. You are tall, so you must play basketball and be really good at it. White people have no rhythm. Single black mothers, they're on welfare. He has gay friends, so he must be gay. Or he has a lot of girls who are friends, so he must be gay. Southerners are just simple and slow. Overweight people are lazy. He's Indian, so he must own a grocery or convenience store. People with tattoos are rebellious. Italians, oh, he must be in the mob. I think you get the point, right? There was a CHRO of an organization that I had the opportunity to go in and also speak with. And I did a similar session where I helped them identify their own biases. And we start openly in a safe space discussing what those stereotypes and biases may be. and how your past experiences play a huge, huge part of that. He was born in 1950, and as many of you can recall, in 1954, the Brown versus the Board of Education ruling by the Supreme Court opened the opportunity of the rights for all Americans to have an equal education, regardless of their race or religion. It was a landmark decision that separated public schools for students of different races to be unconstitutional. Well, Bill, I'll use him as the example of the name. Bill resented that because when he was in high school and the desegregation started to happen and blacks were starting to come into his school, fights broke out. And he could not wait to go off to college. And he was hopeful that when he went off to college, it's like, thank goodness I'm going to a PWI, a primarily white institution, and I won't have to deal or see any blacks anymore. Well, wasn't too long after his freshman year, guess who showed up? More blacks at the PWI. More fights broke out. And he was yet again resentful of the integration that occurred. He then graduated and went on, he said, I'm inspiring my career and I'm moving into retail. And he ultimately wanted to open and have his own store. Well, he did all the right things, ladies and gentlemen. He worked very hard. He checked all the boxes. And when it came up to the assignment, the regional director called him in and he said, well, let me just let you know, for the very first next 100 assignments, affirmative action is going to take place. And the next 100 are going to be assigned to African Americans. Can you imagine the resentment he had yet again in his heart? Well, he did get his store. His store assignment was in Tennessee, a little rural area, didn't make a whole lot of money, but he was determined, he felt like he didn't deserve to be there. Well, fast forward 30 years later, he now had moved up through the ranks, and he was now a chief human resource officer of this 1,000-company staff company. And he was responsible for policies that impacted hiring, that impacted promotion, that impacted benefits, all of those things when you think about HR. Well, what he didn't realize when the company started their own diversity and equity inclusion journey, that the data when they ran it showed that he had not one single African American or black on his team. And mind you, these are influential leaders under his organization that are responsible for the enterprise as a whole and the impact to people's livelihoods. Again, the hiring practices, the pay, the promotion, and things of that nature, and even training. So he was very transparent, and I appreciate his honesty in the session. And he stood up and he said, I did not realize, Dr. Burgos, that my unconscious bias and my experiences from all those years had something to do with me today. I'm embarrassed. As a chief human resource officer, I need to do better. Now, mind you, he is pushing 60 or 70, actually. He was close to 70, not quite there yet, and he was getting ready to retire. But he said, I have an opportunity to make a difference and to do better. And so he charged himself at that very moment to do so. And I appreciated his transparency because he didn't have to open up and share that with his fellow C-suite or anyone else, and definitely not me. But he made the conscious choice. So what is next? How do you and myself continue to move forward? It's incumbent upon each of you to think about what are you going to do? I like to share in closing one of the aspects that I use each and every single day. When I get to know people, and as you heard from Joe, I had the humble honor of being, and my career progressed over the 25 years that I was at TSYS, from starting out as a client rep 1 all the way up to being the chief diversity officer. It was very humbling. I worked hard, and I had an extremely great support system from the legacy of leadership that helped pour into me over those years. But one of the things that I would say that I took away as a nugget was looking at the unique gifts and talents that everybody brings to the table, taking the time to get to know them. And I look at them as like a flower, like a bouquet. My husband of 35 years, he would always deliver me flowers at TSYS on special occasions, on just because occasions. And the staff, when they came by to clean, they would always tease me in my office. They said, Dr. Burgos, you got all these vases in here, from flowers. And it was kind of like a running joke. But I love flowers. I love receiving roses, but I love fresh bouquets even more. That's my favorite. I love lilies and hydrangeas and tulips and baby breath. And you think about that as it relates to people. People are unique in the sense, just like those flowers. They all have their own beauty. They all have their own distinct, diverse aspects about them. And they can stand alone and be absolutely beautiful. But you think about a fresh bouquet, as you see there in the picture. And when you look at it in its totality, it actually is very unique and very beautiful in its own right. And that's how I think of inclusivity. Inclusivity is bringing the unique aspects of people like a bouquet, a fresh cut, together. Whether you do that in your family, whether you do that in your community, whether you do that in your respective organizations. Appreciate the uniqueness of people. I'm very honored at Girls Inc. that I have a wonderful leadership staff. I think of Robin as my rose. I think of Cassie as my carnation. And each one of them, they're so unique, and they bring their talents every single day, and I empower them to be who they are. I don't put them in a silo. I allow them to bring their unique selves to the table, and that's really what DEI, ladies and gentlemen, is all about. I thank you so much for your time today. Here are some of my resources that I pulled this information from, along with my contact information, even though it's in the Rotary directory. Thank you all again. Blessings.
We may have a few questions. We have a few minutes. Are there any questions any of us would like to ask? Ms. Gail? Anyone?
I have one.
Joe?
So what is your definition of woke, and how did that become such a politically charged word? And as we're interacting with each other and discussing events, could you help us there with that, please?
I love you, Joe. So I appreciate that question. What is the definition of being woke? Well, it has an ethnic tone to it, being aware of the racial and the cultural aspects of different races, particularly the black race. But I share with others when I'm talking about, if you want to embrace other cultures, don't just celebrate one month. Hispanic Heritage Month. Yes, it's an opportunity to go and to learn and to explore culture. But guess what? People who are Hispanic or Latinos, they are 365, 24/7. So take that opportunity to explore and be curious about someone who is different than you. Same thing with Black History Month. Don't just celebrate African Americans or blacks just for the month of February. Take the time to do it on a regular basis. Same thing with LGBTQ and Women's Month, which is in March, and Asian Pacific, which is in May. Yes, those are opportunities, ladies and gentlemen, when the collective or your organization or even the world celebrates a particular diverse aspect. But do it on a regular basis. Be curious, right? Take the time to get to know someone. So when you say stay woke or are you woke, you're educating yourself on the diverse aspects of people who are different than you. Okay. Great question. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
In your opinion,
I can hear you.
are we improving in our racial relations, or are we digressing?
Great question. Yes and no. It varies from community to community. It varies from industry to industry. I think with and those of us who work in DEI, we look at the evolution of when progressive change actually happens. So, for example, the civil rights movement had such an impact back in the 60s and the 70s that there was progress made, right? And so it has come full history again in another circle where it has now had a significant impact, and people are being more aware. Same thing with women's rights, same thing with LGBTQ. There's always a significant impact or a historical factor that causes people to pay attention. So there has been progress, and one of my mentors, he said, you have to do all you can as a DEI ambassador, and those of you who are working in that aspect, and even leadership, to make the progress impactful now until the next cycle actually happens. Statistics, of course, you saw there in my slide. If you look at a particular industry, is it a lot of progress and movement when you look at one aspect, the internal, to answer your question, for women or for a particular race? There has been progress made, but is there still a lot of work to do? Yes, it is. It is. Both on an individual and organizational level. Great question. Any other questions?
Another one?
Yes, sir.
We got time. So one thing I love about you is that you're willing to take on any questions that come up. And so for people that have often avoided topics that might be considered sensitive,
Yeah.
what would you say to those folks? Are all questions allowed, or are there some that are just off limits depending on what type of environment you find yourself in? How would you educate those of us that maybe are curious but have historically maybe been more reluctant to ask these questions that we'd really like to know more about?
Great question. Number one, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and ask the question. One of the things, especially during 2020, when organizations was in such a racial uproar, and they were calling in experts and consultants to come in, have what they call critical conversations in their organizations around the racial tension. They said, we need someone to moderate these type of things because we don't want to say the wrong thing. And you actually had HR business partners who were terrified, themselves. They didn't know what to say, and they didn't want to offend anyone, but you had the white and Caucasian members of that organization who said, hey, I'm not like that. I want to be judged. I want to know what can I do, but I don't want to be offensive. So what I recommended, and many of us who were in this DEI space, we said find an ally, someone that is trusted of that race, to have those conversations with, because they know from where you're coming from. They know you're coming from a place of curiosity, and you're coming from a place of sincere help, and you're not coming to be offensive. So find an ally, find someone like myself, Joe, which you have. We've had many conversations, and that's probably why you asked it, to have that conversation so that you can talk from a safe space and that you're not going to be offensive to anyone or say the wrong thing, but still get your answer that you're looking for. Great question. Any other questions? Yes. I can hear you.
Along those same lines, I was curious if there was any particular literature that you've really enjoyed, because I find that, in 2023 now, it is easier than ever for us to find the labor that's already been done, and a lot of writing and great books that have opened us up. So I was just wondering if you had any in the huge library that's out there that you have enjoyed.
Oh my goodness. Yes, there is a sea, and depending on from where you went, thank you for the question, what resources that would be readily available. I can provide you with a list from my aspect, but I think too that if you're wanting to talk to children, there's a lot of literature and information and even videos that you can share with them about diversity. And when I say diversity, not just from a race perspective, but those who are differently enabled. I see that in my own organization with the girls that I serve each day, that we address those who are differently enabled, those who has Down syndrome or special needs. And so there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of videos on that I can share, where it goes from elementary school to middle school to college and even adults. So it is a sea of information.
Wouldn't it be too much to ask, actually?
Sure.
If you would provide
Sure.
this, I'm sure it must be the only one you can.
Absolutely. When I come down, I'll be more than happy to share that. Yeah, thank you. All right.
Okay. Let's give her a hand for it. There's an answer that says confession is good for the soul. I have to confess the fact that when we took on the challenges of the issues that we have in the streets of Columbus, I realized how many unconscious biases I had. the list I could not list. I could not number the things. But I've come to realize that what it requires is an open mind. So I really appreciate you sharing with us today. Gail is a gift to our club. She's here. As Kim talked about a few minutes ago, please pull on those gifts that she has to provide for our club. Today, as a token of appreciation for you presenting to us, we'll put a children's book in our local library, Chattanooga Valley Library, with your name inscribed on it. Let's give her a hand again, if you would. What our intentions was that when I was in Houston at the international conference, one of the things that Rotary International highly stressed is that going into the next year, which will be 2023, DEI was going to be high on its list. So our district governor-elect basically is going to be that person that will come later in the year and kind of sort of talk to us. So we want to just kind of sort of prep our club for where we're going. So thank you again for doing just that. Larry, I saw her standing just a few minutes ago. We got to hear from you because it's been Christmas and a new year and all that. Give us an update on where you are and what's going on with you.
I had a really good break. I decorated the gingerbread house for the first time. I baked with Barbara. I went to Callaway Gardens to see Fantasy and Lights with my friends. We also played a lot of card games and Monopoly, and I ate a lot of good food, and I did not exercise a lot, but it's fine. Yeah, it was a good break. Good Christmas, good everything.
Great. Let's give her a hand. As Gail was sharing with us, we have a gift of Larry right here in the midst of our club. Please take the chance to get to know her. She's only with us for a brief period of time, and then she'll be gone. Reminder of today's program will be on both our Facebook page and our YouTube page, and our next week's program will be one of our own directors, Carol Ridley. I saw Carol a little bit earlier. Carol is right here. That will be presenting for us on next week. At this point, I would ask that you would stand, and Joe will lead us in our four-way test before we be dismissed.
If you'll join me, the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you. With no further business, we stand adjourned.